I would love to jump in with hearing if you all feel the same way about illustrated covers as authors as you do as readers. And maybe we could start there and see where we end up.
Should I start?
Please.
Oh, okay. I mean, I like that. Well, this has been an ongoing conversation where a lot of romance conversations happen on Twitter and other places. But I mean, for someone that writes own voices, and I think I've seen, like, he's commented as well on these things. It's the piece that for us, especially when you are someone that has to go hybrid, because traditional publishing may or may not be ready for the stories that you want to tell at any given moment, or up until now, you don't have we just don't have the ability to do a custom shoot. Like, for example, one of the books that I have come out this year is a gay romance set in Ethiopia. So the main characters were an Ethiopian man and a Dominican American man, who were two Black men. And it was impossible for me to, and I wanted an embrace. The book is called Finding Joy. So I wanted two people looking joyful in a loving embrace. And so I just can't find that on stock. And I can't afford, because it is a self-published book. And even with my traditional published stuff, like, a lot of people who are writing queer romance, who are writing romance that's about people of color, are getting, digital first deals and things like that. So you don't even have the option as a traditionally published author to, like, get a custom shoot or anything like that. So the illustrated cover can lend itself to being able to have at least, some representation, or something that looks like the romance cover you want, even if you can't get that photography, which I love. Like, I like a romance cover that looks like a romance cover, to people embracing, to people, like, gazing at each other lovingly, or something like that. But we can't, what's out there in stock that's affordable, we can't find the people that we are writing about falling in love.
Yeah, I think that my feelings about it are very, very similar. Like, I've had illustrated covers on my books since I started writing, because I write about, trans people and people who are, not necessarily normatively attractive, and people who have disabilities, and the stock is just not there. Like, to do a photographic cover is just not possible. And for a lot, especially in my experience, LGBTQ romance, having illustrated covers is really normal, and has been really normal for a really long time. So, I mean, yeah, I think that there are beautiful photographic covers, and I am lucky enough, Documenting Light, one of my books, Documenting Light, the publisher did do a photo shoot for that book, and that was an amazing experience. So I think that's lovely.
Could you tell us a little bit more about that experience? I'd love to hear if you wouldn't mind sharing.
Sure. So, I mean, I don't know how interesting this will be. It was really like a decision that was made without a lot of my input. Like, we had conversations about the cover, but I didn't ask for a photo shoot or anything like that. They just decided that this was the best choice for the book. And the models that they ended up getting are trans, so that was really amazing to actually have trans models on the cover of a trans romance. I really love it, and I think that it was really great. But yeah, that's, like, in no way the norm.
It's incredible to hear about that representation, and I think something that sometimes on Twitter maybe you can't talk about as much in depth, is that conversation between a publisher and an author, and how much power each party has in that conversation. if any of you wanted to speak to that as hybrid or self-publishing, traditional publishing, kind of what those differences are maybe.
I think that, you know, yeah, when in some ways, you know, like when you're traditionally published, the publisher is really like setting kind of, they're the ones who are paying for the cover. So they're the ones who really set kind of the limitation and the boundaries for what the cover is going to look like. So, you know, if you have a publisher who decides that it works for them to do a photo shoot, they'll do a photo shoot. And that's not something that a lot of more diverse romance authors get often. Or if they decide that it's going to be an illustrated cover, you know, it's going to be an illustrated cover. That's been my experience. As a self-published author, I do have more power to make those kinds of decisions. And when so the first book that I self-published is The Doctor's Discretion, and that does have a photographic manipulation cover. And for me, that was really important to see if we could try and make that happen. It was really, really difficult. And I think that if it had been a different book, it would have been impossible. But it was really important for me to have that because like photographic covers are so iconic in historical romance in particular, I feel like, that I really wanted this trans romance and this queer romance and this romance that had, you know, a Black lead to really be able to be on a shelf with a group of other historical romances and not look out of place. That was really important to me. So the cover artist that I worked with and me worked really hard to make that happen. And I don't know, like, if that's necessarily as important for other books that I write as it was for that one. You know, I think that like the next book that I have coming out will probably have an illustrated cover. But then also kind of the way that we're as a genre thinking about illustrated covers is changing, you know, has changed a lot in the last 3 years since The Doctor's Discretion came out.
Absolutely. I feel like we see a different article every so often, kind of sharing one side, one facet of this conversation. So I think it's cool that we were able to pull it out in this conversation, kind of have more in depth. Yeah, I'd love to hear what you all think about that kind of change that's been happening in the industry, in the attitudes towards illustrated covers.
I think it was like a lot of the discomfort with illustrated covers that I saw personally was coming from people who did feel like it was a departure from traditional romance novels and the way they looked, and that it was an effort to distance newer books from stigma associated with the genre. And I think that is a really fair critique. You know, the romance genre today still does carry a lot of stigma from people outside of it, from like bookstores. We've talked about that. There's still articles talking about Fabio getting published in the year of our Lord 2020. But I think when we started to have more discourse around illustrated covers, more of the arguments toward them enabling inclusion came out, and people who maybe didn't consider that because of their privilege or because it just wasn't something that occurred to them, realized that illustrated covers do allow the genre to evolve in a way that is more inclusive of all different types of love stories. And I think that's really important. I think also like it allows, I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily to invite new readers into the genre through an illustrated cover. I think, you know, I started reading romance quite young. I feel like a lot of people talk about that where, you know, you read it maybe before you were supposed to, you steal it from a family member or something. And I think illustrated covers are a little bit more accessible to younger audiences. And I think romance is really can be beneficial for young readers because it is one of the only media formats that models really healthy, intimate relationships. So I think there are pros that people are now realizing, and that's allowed the discourse to become more accepting of illustrated covers. So I know there are people who still like hate them and don't ever want to see them.
I think that's why I was interested in starting from a place of how we feel differently as authors versus readers. Because I think, you know, people have different opinions about illustrated covers and really intense feelings about them. And we can kind of see that come out on Twitter. And I think, as you said, Rosie, and I've seen in some articles, some people feel like it's misrepresenting what romance is with these really poppy illustrated covers we're seeing for some of the rom-com releases that are coming out. I don't know if I really agree with that, but I'd love to hear if anyone has any thoughts on that kind of argument. Do you think it in any way confuses readers?
I mean, I think it's an interesting kind of, I mean, for me, like, I think it's a piece of what Rosie was saying before. It's like the idea that like by kind of like lowering the, upfront like idea that this is a romantic book, it kind of like allows for more people to kind of like gravitate towards them, because it's not, people have like a perception of books that have sex and romance in them are a certain type of book. And so I think that piece of it, it's like the, you know, like I think part of like why for a while there, like after 50 Shades of Grey, and we all have opinions about 50 Shades of Grey, but like that cover, they did something with that cover. That was a cover that you could have out anywhere. And it wasn't saying, you know, it was very kind of like generic, like you couldn't tell what was happening in that book. And I think that also kind of like, there was like a time for a while there that books that were like erotic romances had like an object, and that was like kind of like what we were doing with covers. And I think it's that the reality of like the stigma that exists around romance, and that like people are kind of like coming into it almost like in a covert way. I think it is. I mean, I think to me, because if you read the blurb, it's a romance, right? So like how inadvertently can you be selling the book if you have to describe it on the back of on the back cover? But it's the idea that that you're kind of like covertly going into it. It's almost what I feel like, because like for us who are like lifelong romance readers, like we know exactly what we're getting as soon as we read that blurb.
I feel like, you know, The Roommate has a very pop cover. Like it's pink, it is illustrated, it has neon on it. Like I think it's, you know, and it's about like the hero is a sex worker. He is an adult performer. And I definitely have gotten people asking me about like, why did you do that? Like, are you misrepresenting the contents, to Adriana's point? And I think it was very strategic in a lot of ways. And people can say it was the wrong choice, but it's something that, going back to like publisher conversations, it is something we talked about, because the book is about subverting expectations. And one of the expectations is about stereotypes that we hold about people who do sex work. And so the book is actually like, I'm going to say wholesome in certain ways, which I think is not something that people represent. So in a lot of ways, like the dichotomy of the sweeter image on the cover is meant to potentially bring people to the book who will hopefully find themselves challenging what they initially thought about the characters. And I think that's great. And I think that if the book was marketed, you know, I would have been very uncomfortable with this, but in a way that like fulfilled stereotypes about adult performing, and people were like, thought they knew what they were getting, then it wouldn't have been a successful endeavor, and it would have kind of undermined all the work that the book was trying to do.
I think that's actually a really interesting point of how the book can kind of subvert expectations or fulfill expectations. And with romance, that's such a part of covers. You know, our covers have been iconic for as long as they've been around, and talked about in good ways and in bad ways. So I think it's really interesting to see these kind of trends be so cyclical and things appear and disappear. Adriana, I loved your point about the object cover, because that was just such a moment in romance when you just saw that flower or drip of honey or whatever it was that was very subtly telling you something would be maybe more erotic than you initially anticipated. Where do you think we're gonna kind of, do you have any insights you'd like to share about where you think we're going and how you see these kind of trends changing? Do you think we're gonna see more illustrated covers? Do you think we're gonna start to see more accessible inclusive stock images, which would be wonderful? I feel like every once in a while I see someone on social media saying, I'm trying to create more inclusive stock, and then I don't see as much about it. But maybe if anyone wanted to share about kind of where we're going.
I mean, I think, I mean, I'd love to see us go back to like those old school Joanna Lindsay covers, like just oil paintings. Like I love that moment. I wish we would, I mean, all I want in life is seeing like a cover with like two trans men and like redoing like Tenders, like, you know, like Tenders a Storm or something like from those times. Like that would be amazing for me. But I don't know if we're going there, but I think one thing that I have noticed is that we are moving from a little bit from like the vector covers and illustrated covers, and I'm seeing more like more detailed illustrations. Like covers are starting to look a lot more like portraits as opposed to like a vector. And I think like Rosie's cover is like that, where you have like the face, like you can see an expression. My cover for Finding Joy as well, like it's a Olivia Dade has put out a couple of books. We use the same illustrator, Lenny Kaufman, but like beautifully done covers. And even like this week I saw, I think it was Karen Booth, she put out a cover, and it's a woman in her late 40s with gray hair and like a Keanu Reeves looking dude.
Such a beautiful cover.
It's gorgeous. And to think, and you know, like Olivia writes fat heroines. This woman is like a gray-haired woman in her 40s. Like my heroes are two Black men in Africa, like in like with the, you know, an African savannah for the background. And I think like that level of detail is like, I think is really interesting, and I think really like kind of gives you a sense for what you're getting. And I think that is a trend that I'm seeing more and more of, because in the beginning it was a little bit less like, you know, it was like blank faces and things like that. So I'd love to see us go more to that. And I do think even now there's more availability for stock. It's still expensive though. Like that's the thing. Like I think it's like, so like the stuff that you can get that's affordable, like for example, for like indies, it's still a little bit more expensive, but I think there is a bit more now that you can find. But only like, not like, you know, non-binary models. Like you can't, there's some stuff that you just still cannot find.
Yeah, I really hope that we, I don't know what covers are going to look like or what directions we're going to go, but I really do hope that we continue with the illustrated covers, and we see more and more of a variety of illustrated covers. I think that, you know, one of my big things in general and right now is seeing romance do more crossover with other genres. I think that there's a lot that's happening with crossover into women's fiction and YA, but like I'm always hopeful for the big push into fantasy and science fiction, because that's also what I love. But like that is a genre with a long history of really diverse different kinds of illustrated covers, and I would love to see romance go more in that direction. So we don't just have the vector or the cutout more cartoony looking ones, which are great if you write rom-coms. I mean, they can be beautiful and it's brilliant, but I don't think, like, for example, it would work for any of my books. Just tonally it would be wrong.
that distinction you both are pointing out between these different kinds of illustrated covers, because I think sometimes we just say illustrated, but there's so many different things that would fall under that umbrella.
Yeah, and I would love to see, you know, like more of a diversity of styles and art styles and all different things.
I think it's interesting too when you consider the subgenres, to your point. Like, historical romance to me is one that I have a really hard time embracing illustrated covers, because I think I came into that subgenre with the step backs, like with those old school covers, whereas I think I am, as a reader, I guess, more accepting of contemporary going into illustrated styles. So I think that is an interesting thing I don't normally think about, like which subgenres will evolve at different paces, and like how will they take influence from, you know, the subgenre itself and the history of that subgenre.
Yeah, I think the way different subgenres, you know, we had an object moment in historical romance a while back. There's like all these Mary Ballow books and others that have like big gems on them, or like a single object. It's interestingly in reference to that kind of 50 Shades thing in such a different way, I think.
Outlander. That was Outlander.
Perfect example. Yeah. Yes, and I love your point about the different subgenres and going into sci-fi, because I think there we can really see some exciting things that could come for romance. I think we could see it in other subgenres as well. Maybe like in the historical mystery kind of stuff we're seeing. I just saw an amazing, I think it was for KJ Charles' new, am I?
Yes. A Sugar Game. Yes.
Thank you. My brain is like here. Yes, Sugar Game, which I just thought was so different. It was like a new style that we're seeing, where that you kind of like, oh, we're going in a new direction, and I loved to see that. I feel like we're getting a lot of comments in the chat, but I'm not sure if I'm supposed to be paying attention to them right now or only at the end. But I'm seeing some other titles in there. People said Bringing Down the Duke has an illustrated, that was another historical with an illustrated cover. So we are kind of seeing that illustrated move into historical too. And Rosie, I think it's really interesting. You said as a reader, you kind of struggle with that a little bit. I recently fell in love with Scarlett Peckham's new cover as well, because I felt like that's kind of where I started reading romance, that look to a cover. I don't know if anyone saw that. I'm sure you all did.
That was great, because it was like a traditional throwback, but subverting kind of the poses. That was awesome. I was super psyched to see that. Like, she has a very powerful heroine. She calls her heroines like alpha heroines, which I love. And yeah, she's like in the dominant position. So I thought that was super cool.
Here's kind of just a question to throw out there. Is there anything you think that you've never seen on a romance cover that you really have always thought, that would be an interesting way for romance covers to go, illustrated or not? I think just, I'm not sure I've ever really seen like an abstract romance cover, or maybe someone has and can correct me.
You see, like the abstracts, I think like that's like more like a YA thing. Like you do see like Nicola Yoon, like some of her covers, or like things like, so I think YA will do that a little more, but in adult romance, I don't think I can recall anything that's like just like, you know, like where the typography is doing like all the work or anything like that. Like usually you have something. That would be an interesting, I mean, that would really kind of be like really kind of trying to take that because like the cover itself is such an important piece of the romance genre. Like, I mean, I think, of course, everybody thinks about covers, but like, you know, Agatha Christie wrote, I don't know, 70, 100 books. And, you know, there's like a golf club, like, you know, it's like, but for the mystery genre, like the cover.
Deals where it's just like a color, but there's nothing going on the cover.
Right.
Okay.
But to us, the cover, like, that's where you start telling the story.
Yeah, which I think is so interesting that romance novelists and readers have such personal feelings about romance covers, because that is a part of the story, as you said, for us. It's a really important part of the book. And I think that's maybe something people outside the genre don't understand as well, kind of that personal relationship that people have to covers. Would anyone?
Well, I was going to ask, and I think it is rooted in a lot of this conversation, is like, do you like to, I think it depends if you like to see the couple or more characters represented when you pick up the love story. Do you want to be able to like envision them, or is it more about, you know, I think what's interesting with the 50 Shades of Grey is I think of that as being almost like a self-insert romance a little bit, in like the way that the heroine is like not very, I'm trying to be tactful, but I think she is accessible to readers in a way that maybe a character that was more distinct would not have necessarily been. And she's obviously not on the cover. So I do think sometimes people have a reaction about that, where it's like, oh, that illustration is like too flat and I can't think of the characters as being attractive, for example, or, oh, that picture, I'm not attracted to like the photorealistic people. So I think that's an interesting thing of like, do we have to walk a fine line of like suggesting the idea of the characters in the love story, but not going so far that you could turn people off?
I think the point of attraction and, you know, what you feel when you look at a romance novel. Do you feel, oh, like this is a love story, I feel like these people are attracted to each other, and whether or not that is important for you as a reader in picking up a book. I know from people browsing in the bookstore, you just get such a varied reaction to it. Some people love it and some people can't stand it. And then also people think that everyone feels the same way that they do, which is always interesting to see people who feel very differently talk about it together.
Yeah, I think for me, honestly, like, it's representation of Afro-Latinx people has been so non-existent in romance up until now. Like, and I think it was also I think EE was talking about this before. It's like, we haven't seen ourselves on the shelves. And so to me, at some point, maybe I'll be more comfortable with kind of like leaving it to the imagination of the reader. But for me, it's almost like I'm putting my stake in the ground. Like, I want this man to look as Dominican as possible on this cover. Like, if like a Dominican abuelita sees him from like 3 meters away, she will know that boy is Dominican, because that's what I haven't been able to get as a romance reader, you know? So I think to me, that's like I think there's different, like, we're in different stages depending on what type of people we're writing. For us, I think we're still in that stage where like, we're still kind of like building our presence in the genre. So it feels important that we're like explicitly and very well represented in those covers. And I think as that becomes more normalized, then it might not feel as important for it to be like very obviously what like the identity of the characters. But I think for me, it still feels really important for it to have that representation, if that makes sense.
I think that's a really beautiful thing that all of us need to, those of us who have always seen ourselves represented on covers, need to consider. And that romance as the genre of fantasy, everyone deserves that fantasy love, and everyone deserves to see that fantasy represented on the cover however they want, whether that's illustrated, whether that's photorealist, whether that's an oil painting, which I would also love to get back to. I feel like I have so many questions, I don't even know where to go next. What's been one illustrated cover that's come out recently for each of you, maybe that you've read or just saw, that you thought really did a good job of kind of representing what an illustrated cover can do. Or maybe I'd be happy to start if you want. I really loved Vanessa Riley's new The Duke, a Lady and a Baby, because I thought that was a perfect example of a rom-com cover that, you know, there are some really serious themes in that book, but it is also a play on this great classic rom-com, and I loved that cover. I really thought it worked really well for me. Oh, I saw someone also mention Bringing Down the Duke, which was another one that I thought was really fabulous. I think, oh, sorry, please.
Oh no, I was just gonna, I mean, we already mentioned these, but I really think like Lenny Kaufman's covers have been like gold standard. Like we need a couple more people who can help Lenny out. But Olivia Dade's books for me are such a perfect expression of joy, and the way I think about her writing really comes across on the cover of her books. And I think that is aspirational for me as like a writer, to like have a cover and then also have like incredible writing that people like, it gives them a visceral emotion. But yeah, those are like 40 Love I read recently, and I'm actually like in the middle of spoiler alert, and I think both of those covers perfectly, even though they're illustrated and a lot of people say illustration doesn't capture the same depth of emotion, they really do for me. And like the nuance of emotion, like the kaleidoscope of things that Olivia's writing captures.
I hadn't heard that illustrated doesn't capture the kind of nuance of emotion as much. I think that's really interesting, because for me, I've seen lots of illustrated covers, I think, that really do convey a lot of emotions. I see people in the comments mentioning Alexis Daria's You Had Me at Hollow, which I just is a perfect example. And someone says it really does capture all the romantic feelings of a clinch cover, which I think when I saw that, I was like, wow, that really does evoke that same kind of fantasy romance. And then I think for it being the setting of the book, it felt really perfect to me. I have seen people say that they'd love publishers to put more money into custom photo shoots for some of these books, rather than go the illustrated route. Does anyone feel like the illustrated covers need to be done away? I'm not sure how I feel about that, because I think so many illustrated covers are so great and turn out so wonderfully.
I think like I'm just pro publishers putting a decent amount of money into romance covers, period. Like whether or not they're going to choose to do an illustrated cover or do a photo shoot or do some kind of like photographic manipulation. I think that sometimes those of us in romance can kind of like, because romance authors tend to be so prolific, and because publishers tend to publish so many books at such a rapid fire rate, sometimes I can feel like we don't get covers that are as beautiful or as detailed and cost as much as they might give authors writing in other genres, you know. And so yeah, I mean, I think that for me, it's not a matter of publishers should be, only doing photo shoots, or publishers should only be doing illustrated covers. I think it's a matter of publishers should be giving the money and the care to thinking about and designing and making romance covers as beautiful and appropriate for that book as they can. Yeah.
I think there's a real market for someone who specializes in romance stock photos to really create some images that we don't see as often. And I see someone saying that in the comments as well. They'd like to see models who aren't traditionally represented get paid for stock, which would be pretty awesome too.
Yeah, and there's a few people, like there's a few photography studios that do have, but I think it's the same thing. Romance is such a big genre, and there's so many books coming out all the time that like things get like, even, you know, things just get used up. Like you end up seeing like the same few couples on the covers, because there's like, romance like is vast and wide and fast. So I think that's the other piece. Like I think the supply and demand is also an issue.
There's one woman who keeps showing up on every historical cover. I've seen her on, there she is again, which it doesn't really bother me that much, I have to admit, but it's just funny that she, like, can't we try anyone else? No? Okay. And I'm seeing some people saying in the comments too, which I'd love to hear what you guys think, so that some publishers aren't really representing the book with the illustrated cover. Maybe there's a change in skin tone. I see someone mentioning the Boyfriend Project, and I've also seen that in photographic covers. I won't call anyone out by name, but there have been covers where they've discussed they have a light-skinned black man on the cover, but the man in the book is just described as a dark-skinned man. So I think you get it kind of from both sides. You can mess up either way, photography or illustrated. So tired of the male torso cover. Yeah, I mean, I think we are seeing some new things happening, but we're also kind of seeing these references back, like with Scarlet Peckham. I just think it's a really interesting time to be in romance and to kind of see where we go from here.
And I think indie is doing a lot of work too, and kind of like really starting, like I think because also indie is so much faster. Like I think they can start a trend and end a trend before traditional publishing even like really like catches up to it. So just because it's so fast. So I think that's the piece that's also interesting, because I think you can see like things happening, like traditional started with the illustrated covers, but now like you go and you see a ton of illustrated covers also now coming up. Like indies are doing illustrated covers, and then who knows how that's gonna like jump back to traditional covers. Like I think the Milla Vane just came out with a book, the Dragons book. It's the Song of Blood and Ashes or something like that, which is amazing if you haven't read it. And it's just like a guy, like a guy without a head, and like furs and like a sword or something. And when I saw it, and it's a Berkeley book, when I saw it, I thought, oh, it looked like an indie. Mm. But it wasn't. And so I think like there's also the piece of like it's I don't know, like I think that like they feed off each other, right? Like indies doing some stuff.
An interesting point, the way they reference each other.
And evoke something, because I knew that book was going to be hot just from seeing the cover. Like I didn't know what it was about, but I knew something amazing was going to happen in that book, and it did. And I literally had no idea it was indie. It was a traditionally published book until like I started reading it.
It's really interesting. I think another thing that we didn't even really get to, well, we can talk about now, is the way readers interact with books. So many romance readers are reading ebooks and are downloading the books to their e-readers. And so the way that they interact with a cover is really different. But I think after we've started to see this push, so exciting for romance in bookstores, it just becomes a different conversation, whether or not you really care about getting your book in a bookstore and whether that's really important to you and what you need to do to make sure cover-wise that happens. I think that we kind of see that conversation changing as well. Yeah, so I'd love if anyone wanted to talk about if you think about designing differently for an e-reader, or if you keep it the same as you would for a print book.
I can jump in and talk about that because I was just thinking about that this afternoon as I was looking at some cover drafts. You know, like when I know that a book is going to be primarily an ebook, one of the things that I look at a lot is how it looks small, because people are going to be primarily interacting with it at a small size. So I need to know, you know, is the title legible? Is the author's name legible? And how does this, you know, look when it's, you know, when it's fairly small, when it's going to be, you know, on Amazon and people are going to see that and then they're going to put it on their phone and it's never going to be more than 5 to 7 inches tall. As opposed to, you know, if it's going to be in print, you know, it could be the size of a trade paperback, it could be much larger, you know, like, so that's a different kind of a thing, and you're kind of thinking about like more, you know, what does the spine look like, what's it going to look like on the shelf, you know, things like that. So yeah, I think that there are definitely very different things to think about for that. And then of course, if you're going to have the book and it's going to be in both formats, then you need to walk that line and make sure that it is going to serve both purposes. So.
Yeah, same. Like if you think it's gonna be you have to think about like the thumbnail, what that's gonna look like, and if people are gonna click. Like with Rosie's cover, I think that neon, like the neon sign for, like that looks great on a thumbnail. Like I was thinking, man, all the typography should be neon now, because like that just like draws the eye to it. And so you have to think about that stuff of how it's gonna look like on a phone, or like along like with another 6 covers on like you know, bookstore website, as opposed to on a bookshelf.
I think one interesting thing about e-reader versus print too is like, how sexy can your cover be? Because I think when it's in an e-reader, it's kind of like it's between you and that book kind of thing. Whereas if it is something that you're holding and you're reading like on the subway, or you're gonna like take to a beach vacation with your family, like I personally, and it's something like I try to work on, but like it takes a certain gumption to like carry a really, really sexy cover to like the grocery store or whatever. And I think like that gets into like a larger discussion about like, how do we, for those types of books, like, is it about getting readers more comfortable holding that in a print format? Like, does it stay in ebook? I don't like have an answer to any of that, but that's something like, again, as like a reader / thinking of it from a reader perspective, like I love like a sexy cover, but you know, I do sometimes have to like battle my own sense of like shame, because it's like depicting desire, and it's desire outside of like the stereotypical like cis heterosexual male gaze, and that makes other people uncomfortable, and I have to decide whether I'm like up for that battle every day.
I saw someone in the comments say, which I hadn't even really considered because I don't read on e-reader that much, is that it has to look good in black and white too on an e-reader, which I hadn't even thought about. And for illustrated covers, I do think adds like a whole other dimension, because so much of it is about those poppy colors and the contrast between the colors really kind of grabbing a reader. So it's really interesting to think about. I really didn't even think about that. I'm going to head over to the Q&A and see what people are asking about. The first one is about multiple versions of covers and how that can impact different readers' experiences. One thing they mentioned that we didn't really touch on is different countries, which I think is so interesting for covers. And I personally love to see other countries' covers. I love when authors post them on Instagram and Twitter and stuff. I think it's so interesting to see what other countries respond to in comparison. Did any of you have different covers for international editions?
Yeah, I do for the UK audience, which I thought was really interesting. And like, you know, I came over as an American expat to the UK quite recently, and I had to like learn about the way the romance genre is like quite different here than it is in the US. I'd only ever been exposed to the US market as a reader primarily. But here, like romance in a genre kind of typical sense, the way I understood it in America, like doesn't really exist. It's more about like chick lit, like much more of like a women's fiction bent, to my understanding. So my cover for The Roommate is in the US is like we were talking about, like is actually like almost a painting, like the level of detail in the illustration, and it's completely flat in the UK version. Goes like much more back to what you would almost think about as like a, I'm trying to think of like who it would be, like almost like an old school like Meg Cabot kind of thing. And I think again it's meant to, they don't have like the same history with romance that we do here. So I thought that was really interesting. I like had to learn about like a whole other segment of the market within publishing and all of that stuff. So I think the covers do tend to reflect the differences in readers' approaches to the genre. Oh, you're on mute.
I'm muted, guys, sorry. Another question I think kind of also interacts with this one, because I think social media has really changed the way we can see the publishing industry, because we can see other countries' publishing industries. And someone asks, how important do you think Instagram is for the design of a romance cover? And I think the rise of Bookstagram and the rise of reading and social media and how those two things interact is really interesting in this conversation, if anyone wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I don't think anybody can write a book, try to market a book and not think about like how it would look on Instagram, or how, or if it's like, it's appealing, like, and that's why I go back to like really thinking about like the more like variety there is in covers, and like what you're trying to do is really do something that matches the story and catches the eye, is really important. I think thinking about like, you know, those, there's a lot of black and white photography covers in indie with really bold typography. And I think it's very much thinking about the Kindle, like those covers are gonna be in black and white. They're gonna do most of their sales on ebook, or, you know, Nook or whatever. And so that's like the thinking behind that, and like the typography that jumps out at you like when you're scrolling. So that's the type of thing that really, I don't think I know I do a lot of my marketing, my promo, a lot of my brand is on social media. So I have to think about like, what, you know, 700 different ways can I like mock up this cover for like the next 6 weeks. So it's you have to think about social media and Instagram, I think.
Yeah, and I think like the primary thing that I think about when I think about covers and social media is like, is your cover going to stand out, right? Like if the people are following a lot of book folks or a lot of romance folks, then there's a good chance that they're going to see, you know, dozens of covers in a however many day period. You know, is your cover going to be something that people are going to remember long enough to then go and look it up on, you know, Amazon or wherever they buy their books. So yeah, that's something I think about a lot.
I think this also, because now we're all interacting so much on social media because we're all supposed to be at home. Another question that someone asked is, Nick B asked is, do you anticipate the pandemic changing cover trends? And I think now that like all book promo has to happen on social media and via virtual events, I'm really curious about that too. If we'll see this somehow affect covers in the future. I don't know. Does anyone think? I can't think of something obvious, but maybe.
Did we lose Rosie?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Oh.
Hello.
I don't know, maybe she'll come back.
You'll pop back.
Virtual events.
Almost
I have no idea. I was actually just having this conversation yesterday because I was on a panel like in March, and I was thinking everything's going to be different now because this pandemic, and romance is going to be different in a year. But I feel like now, like 6 months into it, like now it's like kind of like how we live. And it doesn't feel, I don't feel like so, and like I don't feel the need to like change everything that I had planned about how I'm going to be writing my stories. But I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there's like more, like one thing that's interesting, there's a lot of paranormal that's being acquired. So we're gonna see, I think we're gonna see a return of those like old paranormal, and then like rom-coms. Like I've seen a lot of like deals with like rom-com witches, like, and so that's going to be an interesting trend to see how they do illustrated with paranormal, because that's going to happen. I love this cat.
I love this.
So I mean, that's like, I'm really interested in seeing how they're going to do illustrated and paranormal, and if the old school paranormal is going to come back, like it'll be interesting to see that, how that happens, because so much is being acquired now.
Someone said in the comments the reason they brought that up is that JC Lee said that they couldn't do a photo shoot for her new book cover on social media. So that's so interesting to consider. And Adriana, as you said, if we have all these new paranormals coming out and they can't do photo shoots, like we're going to get some crazy illustrated covers. I'm pretty excited to see that. Someone asks, do you think about color trends? And I'm so curious to hear what you all think about that, because as a bookseller, I can tell you, it's like all purple at one point, all pink the next, like they come in waves. It's so interesting. And I'm wondering if you guys think about that.
I'm gonna be super honest, I don't. I have noticed it, you know, like I'll be like, wow, there's a lot of covers that are yellow, you know, like it's just all yellow covers on my Twitter. But like when I'm thinking about designing a cover for my own books, and when I specifically about like color scheme there, I'm usually thinking about like what's going to fit the tone of the book, you know, the style that the cover is going to be, things like, you know, what's going to look legible, what's going to look good on the screen, what's going to look good on social media, and less about like, you know, red covers are in, so it better be red, you know.
That
so.
honestly confirms to me that it's just like sometimes there's something in the air and we're all like, oh, red seems good. And then all of the red books appear, because sometimes it does seem like it's happening like that. There was the pink and then the green, and I'm excited to see what's next. Okay, I've left this question till last because I'm so excited to hear what everyone's answers are. If there's one book to give the old school detailed step back treatment to, what book would you pick? And we can all take a minute and think if we want. It's a tough one.
I have a thought. I love, like, one of my favorite books that I read last year is The Widow of Rose House, which was a historical, like a Gothic historical, and it has a very beautiful cover. It's like I think it is a photo, and it's like a woman's back in like maybe like a velvet dress or something. But I don't feel that cover did justice to the incredible romance within. I feel like it didn't, like, and also like The Widow of Rose House plus a Gothic cover, like neither of those things signaled romance to me, and so I like avoided it for a while, thinking it was going to be spooky, and I'm a big, like, I'm real afraid of anything scary. And so that has like such beautiful depth of emotion and takes place in like a really interesting time period, and I think that could really, like, it would be amazing to see a step back and get full regalia for that one.
I would love to see the KJ Charles Society of Gentlemen series get like the full-on Joanna Lindsay treatment. Like, everything you can do to a cover, including a step back. I would love to see those covers done that way, because those stories are so rich and there's so much emotion in them, and I think they'd be perfect for like one of those like really like over the top covers.
I think that's a really, really good choice. That reminded me of mine, which would be Rebel Carter's series. I would love to see those with the old school, like, please someone do that.
I was also going to just say KJ Charles Society of Gentlemen series, because I think like that would just be amazing. Like hands down. And I love KJ Charles' more recent illustrated covers, and I think that doing that for those ones would just bring them in line with the more recent ones that she's published. So yeah, absolutely, I would love that. But I'm gonna be the selfish one and say my own book.